Okay, let's unpack this. Imagine you need a quick, clear guide to a pretty complex international story. One that touches on, well, everything from military training right through to human rights. That's exactly what we're diving into today. We've got a stack of sources from our listener reports, inquiries, news stuff, even parliamentary records, and they all focus on the British Army Training Unit Kenya, or Batuk. Now, Batuk's been in Kenya for decades, training with Kenyan forces, a consistent presence. But, and this is what's really compelling in the material, their operations seem tangled up in some very serious, persistent controversies. So, our mission today, to pull out the key nuggets for you. What Batik actually is, the big incidents people talk about, and crucially, why justice seems so slow. Get ready for, well, maybe some surprising facts and a clearer view on a story that keeps hitting the headlines.
Yeah, and what really stands out from the sources is just how long BTIC's been there. We're talking a really long-standing UK Army training base at Yadi Barracks in Nanyuki, plus exercises out in Laikipia and Archer's Post, big areas. And this isn't informal. It's all under a formal defense cooperation agreement, the DCA, with Kenya. You've got, what, maybe up to 10,000 UK troops rotating through each year for field training, working alongside the Kenya Defense Forces. But like you said, the sources are clear. This long presence means, well, decades of scrutiny, too, from Parliament in both countries and the press.
Right, and that scrutiny often lands on some really difficult human rights cases. The first one, maybe the most prominent, is the killing of Agnes Wanjiru back in 2012. Can you walk us through what the sources say happened there?
Sure. Agnes Wanjiru was a young Kenyan woman, 21 years old. She went missing in March 2012. Last seen, apparently, with British soldiers at a hotel there in Nanyuki. Her body was found 2 months later, tragically in a septic tank at that hotel. Now, what's really critical here is the finding from the Kenyan inquest. It concluded she was murdered by a British soldier, plainly stated. But as of today, we're recording on August 12th, 2025. Still, no one's been charged. Kenya technically has primary jurisdiction. The crime happened there. But even though the case got a lot of fresh attention in 2021, after UK media reported on it, progress has been, well, incredibly slow. Just this month, August 3rd, actually, Wanjiru's family spoke out again, criticizing the slow pace. This is despite, renewed promises of cooperation from the UK. Kenyan prosecutors are apparently reviewing the file again this year.
More than a decade.
Yeah.
That's a staggering delay with no charges. So what does this case, the specific long delay, really tell us about how these defense agreements work in practice, especially when something so serious happens? Does justice actually get delivered?
It really is the key test case, isn't it? The Wanjiru case is the most visible example we have to judge whether these systems work. Can soldiers accused of serious crimes, even off-duty ones, actually face justice? Are the cooperation mechanisms between the UK and Kenya, the ones laid out in the DCA, are they actually effective? The fact that there are still no charges, despite that inquest finding?
Well, it highlights a major gap between the agreement on paper and the reality on the ground.
A major gap, yeah. That's a powerful way to put it. So beyond tragic individual cases like Agnes Wanjiru's, did the sources point to other, maybe larger-scale incidents, patterns of harm linked to Batuk? Oh, absolutely. The 2021 Luldaiga Conservancy wildfire is a huge one. This was a massive fire started during a British training exercise back in March 2021. It ended up burning something like 12,000 acres of this wildlife conservancy. That's about 4,800 hectares. The impact was, well, immediate and pretty devastating for the area. You had residents, conservationists reporting injuries, health problems from the smoke, and obviously huge ecological damage. And tragically, at least one person, a conservancy worker named Linus Murungiri, died in an accident while they were trying to fight the fire.
Okay, so a massive fire, ecological damage, even a death linked to the firefighting. What happened legally after that? Did the people affected get any kind of resolution or compensation?
Well, yes and no. There's been significant legal action. Kenyan courts actually ordered the British Army to compensate victims. Multiple lawsuits went forward. But the sources say claimants consistently report that the compensation process is very slow, payments are lagging, and this whole issue blew up again, quite publicly, around King Charles III's visit to Kenya in 2023. Now, Batuk and the UK High Commission, their official line is that they are cooperating, but they also contest some of the claims being made publicly. So again, you see the sort of gap, a legal ruling ordering compensation, but slow progress in actually getting it to the people affected. It's a recurring theme.
It definitely sounds like a pattern, these direct harms, the fire, the Wanjiru case. But I'm wondering, did the inquiries dig into maybe broader issues like systemic problems in how personnel interacted with the local communities?
Yes, that's a really important point. There's been a significant focus on sexual exploitation and abuse, SEA. Sometimes it's termed transactional sex. There was a UK Ministry of Defense Service inquiry. The report came out June 6, 2025. It looks specifically at allegations of SEA by UK personnel in Kenya, focusing on the period 2019 to 2023. And it documented 35 instances of alleged SEA or transactional sex. That's among the roughly 700 personnel deployed during that time, not counting longer-term relationships. And their conclusion was pretty stark. They said troops had been, and I quote, breaching policy for many years.
Breaching policy for many years. Wow. That's quite an admission from an official mod and inquiry. What does that suggest? I mean, beyond just individual misconduct, and what did they recommend doing about it?
It suggests, well, it points towards something more systemic, doesn't it? Not just a few bad apples, maybe a failure in oversight or even culture that allowed this to go on. It implies the need for more fundamental reforms, and the recommendations reflect that. They called for stronger policing by the military police, bans on visiting certain high-risk bars or venues, and significantly a presumption of discharge for anyone caught doing this. Basically, you'd likely be kicked out of the army.
Right.
And this is important because even if some argue it's consensual, transactional sex in places with significant poverty can be inherently exploitative. Plus, it clearly violates UK military policy. So the inquiry is the mood formally acknowledging this problem and setting out steps to fix it.
And there's another pattern mentioned in the sources, more historical maybe, but still causing harm today. Unexploded ordnance, UXO.
Yes. This is a really difficult legacy issue. It keeps coming back. The training ranges used by the UK in northern Kenya, well, they have a long, tragic history of leftover explosives harming civilians, especially children, hurting animals or pastoralists just moving through the area. Now, there was action on this in the past. After lawsuits in the early 2000s, the UK government paid out $4.5 million to 228 victims back in 2002. And then they compensated around 1,100 more claimants in 2004. But it hasn't stopped. New incidents occur. For example, in 2015, a young boy, Lisokole Sisoyan, he was 13. He picked up a mortar fuse near Archer's Post. He lost both his arms and an eye. Just devastating.
Yeah.
The press and questions in Parliament linked that specific type of fuse to UK training. The MARD actually withdrew that type later, and Batuk has paid compensation in some of these more recent cases too.
It's just awful to imagine children and whole communities living with that danger constantly. It must fundamentally change how they live. So given all these recurring issues, the Wanjiru case, the fire, SEA, the UXO, what have Kenyan institutions, their parliament, been doing? How are they responding?
Well, they've become increasingly vocal and active, according to the sources. Kenya's National Assembly has a committee on defense, intelligence, and foreign relations. Between August 2023 and into 2024, they launched a public inquiry specifically into Batuk's conduct. They actually invited ordinary citizens to submit evidence, which is significant. And MPs in that committee openly raised concerns, especially about the Wanjiru case, and pushed for, real accountability mechanisms on Kenyan soil. This has really fueled the debate over the Defense Cooperation Agreement itself, particularly the parts about jurisdiction. Kenyan lawmakers are pushing hard for serious crimes like murder committed by visiting soldiers to be prosecuted locally in Kenyan courts. There are strong calls to basically rewrite those parts of the DCA to make sure Kenyan courts can try the most serious offenses.
And didn't we see a really major development on that just last week?
We did, yeah, very recently, August 13th, 2025. That same National Assembly Committee, the one chaired by Nelson Koch, the MP for Batuk, they went further. They explicitly called for the entire Batuk contract to be terminated. Their reasoning, the ongoing human rights abuses, they were quite sharp about it. They accused Batuk officers of being hostile because they apparently failed to show up before the committee to answer questions about these abuses. The committee said they'd just write the report without Batuk's input. Other MPs, like Memuzi Kanchuri and Yusuf Hassan, accused Batuk of contempt. Some even suggested dissolving the whole agreement with the UK government. They really emphasized Kenya's sovereignty in all this.
Wow, calling for termination. That's a huge step from a parliamentary committee. How did the Kenyan government itself, like the defense minister, respond to that pretty direct challenge?
Well, the Defense Cabinet Secretary, Soy Pantuya, she tried to moderate things a bit. She urged the committee to basically give Batuk more time. And she argued that it wasn't really within the committee's mandate to directly engage Batuk like that. She said the issue had escalated to a diplomatic level, being handled by a joint intergovernmental liaison committee. So it highlights the different levels here, the parliamentary pressure versus the executive diplomatic track.
Okay, so you've got Kenyan MPs really pushing, asserting sovereignty, even calling for termination. But the Defense CS points to diplomacy. And the UK, as you said, keeps stating it supports Kenyan jurisdiction for off-duty crimes. Yet we still see the Wanjiru family's frustration, the slow compensation for the fire. What explains this disconnect? Why the gap between the official statements and procedures and the actual outcomes for victims?
That really is the core problem, isn't it? It's complex. First, even if jurisdiction seems clear in the agreement, like a crime off duty in Kenya falls under Kenyan law, the practicalities are tough. Gathering evidence across borders, dealing with different military command structures, navigating the details of these status of forces
Oh,
agreements.
status of forces, right. Those are the specific rules for visiting troops.
Exactly. They define the legal status, including who has jurisdiction under what circumstances. They're meant to make training cooperation easier, but they can also create these complex hurdles when things go wrong, which seems to be part of the issue in the Wanjiru case. Then you have the legacy harms, like the UXO. Decades of contamination create this backlog of claims and, frankly, a lot of distrust. So every new incident just fuels that existing anger and frustration. And finally, think about the community impact. It's not just about criminal law. When a fire destroys grazing land, or an accident happens on a range, or there's exploitative behavior, it hits people's livelihoods, their health, their basic dignity. It even raises constitutional questions in Kenya, like the right to a clean and healthy environment, which the fire directly impacted.
Okay, so putting it all together, as of today, August 12th, 2025, what are the key things that remain unresolved, despite all the inquiries, reports, and statements?
Well, number one is clearly the prosecution in the Agnes Wanjiru case. It's still outstanding. 13 years since her death. We have an inquest finding, reviews, but no suspect charged in Kenya or the UK. Families, NGOs, they keep pushing both governments. Second, the Loldaiga fire compensation. Kenyan courts ordered it, but victims say the payouts and the environmental cleanup work are lagging behind. It's not fully resolved. And third, the sexual exploitation issue, that 2025 MOD inquiry. It lays out a plan for tougher action. But real lasting change depends on whether that's actually enforced day to day. Will there be proper joint policing with Kenyan authorities? Will disciplinary actions actually stick and be seen to stick? That's the open question. So if we step back and look at the bigger picture here, what does it all add up to? You've got over a decade where Kenyan communities have alleged and sometimes proven really significant harm linked to Batuk's presence and activities. We've covered the terrible unresolved murder of Agnes Wanjiru, the official findings on sexual exploitation, the huge environmental damage to the Loldaiga fire, those tragic injuries from unexploded ordnance.
And in response, you see Kenyan courts and parliament stepping up, asserting sovereignty, demanding local accountability, demanding fair compensation. The UK side, for its part, has acknowledged serious policy breaches, especially with that SEA inquiry. They've addressed some historical harms, like the older UXO cases, and they consistently say they support Kenyan jurisdiction for crimes committed off-duty.
Right. But what's so striking, really fascinating here is that even with those acknowledgments, those agreements, justice, compensation, remediation, it's all moved incredibly slowly, if at all in some cases. The Wanjiru case, still unresolved since 2012, it just hangs there as the symbol of all the complexity, the challenges when these cross-border military agreements hit reality, when something goes badly wrong. And maybe this raises a bigger question for you, our listener, to think about. In our world today, forces train overseas all the time. It's increasingly common. So what's the right balance between maintaining good diplomatic ties, respecting national sovereignty, but also ensuring that people on the ground who are harmed actually get timely, effective justice? It's a really profound challenge, isn't it? And it goes way beyond just Kenya and the UK.